All right, Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, glory, and honor unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Harakaha Kodash. Double honors unto the apostles and elders of James Great Millstone, and a sincere shalom to Yakim, bringing out his word in diligence and in truth. And as you see, the subject of the lesson is going into the Greenland U.S. topic of conflict and tension, man, which ultimately boils down into, you know, the beast, which is NATO and the EU, right? Hating that whore, right? Or the whore that rideth the beast, right? And that whore is who? Babylon the Great, also known as America, man, right? So I want to get into a couple articles and some information from chat, right? Matter of fact, let's start off with the cause of this madness, because we ultimately understand this through Esau's greed, in which the way that the elites have Trump moving as far as conquering and getting back in that quote unquote manifest destiny spirit. Hey, this is causing the nations to get angry, man, right? Because he's heaping all resources, all nations unto himself, as the scripture says. Right. So this is Micah 2 at the top. It says, woe to them that devise iniquity and work evil upon their beds. And we just in the Davos, meeting, the WEF, the World Economic Forum, that's a council that's actually being that's occurring, I believe today or tomorrow. One second, let me check. Davos conference. (2026). All right, so it's actually occurring from the 19th to the 23rd. So it started it started on Monday and it ends Friday, man. And we understand that it's a lot of councils, secret councils of the wicked being had up there, speaking about the next moves that are going to be made as far as the hammer of the earth, as far as how to usher in a Novus Ordo Seclorum. So we're in the midst of great prophecy, man. We're in the midst of great prophecy, right? And that's what they're doing. They're devising that iniquity and evil upon their beds, right? When the morning is light, they're practicing it because it is in the power of their hands, right? So it's time for a new regime, a new, revitalization, much like how you had the, what do you call it? The new age, man, right? And where it's like a new age in which, AI is going to rule, a new age in which transhumanism is going to peak, right? This is what we're in the midst of, all while Esau Edom, as the scripture says in the second verse here, it says, and they covet fields and take them by violence, and houses and take them away. So they oppress a man in his house, even a man in his heritage. And we see in the U.S. sees, the assets or the natural resources of Venezuela, man. And they did it with no hesitation, right? And why did they do it? Because Venezuela is oil rich, right? You have black gold, which is oil over there, man. And they supply the world, or have 30% of the world's oil, right? So it was basically a bully move on behalf of the U.S., to ultimately get a market, or get a higher ground in the market from its competitors, Russia, China, and the Saudis, and control part of that infrastructure, man. Right? But he ain't stopping. He's not stopping, man. To the point where now he wants Greenland, not just because of the resources over there, but because of the geopolitical position that it holds in the earth, man. Right? It gives forth a greater stand against Russian nuclear missiles, right? But let's get back into it. This is it says Russia warns Trump that he would trigger the end of the world if he captures Greenland. It says a top Russian official has warned of the end of the world if Donald Trump manages to secure Greenland for the U.S. It comes as tensions are continuing to rise between Washington and Copenhagen over the future of the island. Trump has been reiterating the need for the U.S. to own Greenland, a semi-autonomous region within Denmark, for national security reasons. Despite some 85% of Greenlanders showing their opposition to being taken over by America, the White House has said it will look um, to get the island one way or another. Right? We understand when the U.S. wants something, they'll do one of two things. Right? They either set up a puppet leader in that land, and ultimately, you know, um, state that that leader, is hindering its citizens from receiving some type of freedom, right? And ultimately corrupt it from within to where it decays. Or they'll do what? And they'll just send an army upon that place and seize it, right? And they rather do the latter, right? As the scripture says, they're not satisfied with blood, right? We've seen that how they infiltrated, or it's like infiltrated Venezuela to the point where their soldiers had no means to fight because they used a different type of um what you call a subsonic weapon on them, to incapacitate them, man, right? And that was all done within what, hours? So how much more Greenland, you know, a country who has no defense against U.S. weapons, man. Says defending his demands, Trump has said if he does not take over Greenland, Russia or China will. Now, one top Russian official within the government has said that Trump's move should be stopped to avoid an all-out third war. Now, why would this third war occur? Well, ultimately, the scriptures tell us, and I'll grab it here. Just a quick pre. It's Revelation 11 and 14, and it tells us the second war was past, and behold, the third war cometh quickly. Right, so the second war was the Second World War, and the third war was World War III. Right, and it comes quickly because ultimately, the time for America to be that that whore, that who make it the nations drink of the cup, that time is winding down, man. Yahweh Shah has bounds that they should not pass, and ultimately, a prophecy has to move forward, right? So the elites, as the scripture says in the book of Proverbs, as the rivers, it's like the heart of the king is in the hands of the Lord, and as the rivers of water, he turneth it whithersoever he will. Ultimately, Yahweh Shah is a spirit on the elites for them to continue or extend, right, their global infrastructure, man, which consists of the MOTB being the uh, the forefront of the economic department, right? That being the CHI to the P, the book of Revelation, the 13th chapter and the 16th verse, right? And ultimately, for people to receive this device, so that they can be marked, or branded as cattle, right? But we understand before that occurs, this is just the a birth pain, as the scripture says in the book of Second Esdras, right? So I typed into the chat. I said, "What is the purpose of the U.S. gaining Greenland?" It says the idea of the U.S. gaining Greenland isn't about population or culture. It's almost entirely geostrategic, meaning what? Um, Basically a war strategy, right? Against who? The U.S.'s main enemy, which is who? Russia, right? The other superpower. Says the interest has existed since the 1800s and has intensified in the 21st century due to climate change, great power competition, and Arctic recess or Arctic access. Salaka. Says military and strategic control of the Arctic, and that's the point, right? After you have or Slaki. This is the number one reason, and then from there you have the natural resources that are within that land. It says Greenland sits at one of the most strategically valuable locations on Earth. It lies between North America and Europe along the shortest missile and aircraft routes. Control strengthens U.S. dominance over the GIUK gap. Greenland, Iceland, UK, a critical NATO choke point for tracking Russian submarines and aircraft, right? And we understand when we go into the book of Revelation, the 17th chapter, Revelation, the 13th chapter, it speaks about the beast, right? Matter of fact, I'll grab it now. It's Revelation 13 at the top, right? And understanding that Revelation, the 13th chapter, is speaking of ultimately how Esau, Edom came into power, through various kingdoms, man. Right? It speaks about, and I'll read it here. It says, "And I stood upon the sea," right? Starting this global dominance, first occurred from the Greeks, that third beast, ultimately going into the fourth beast, which was the Roman Empire. Uh, so just giving that information, qualifying the information to go into this, the first verse. It says, "And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rise up out of the sea, right, having 7 heads and 10 horns." It's lucky. And upon his 10 horns, it's like, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his head the name of blasphemy, right? And this is speaking of what the NATO and the EU, man, right? The 7 heads representing Germania Major, Germania Minor, the Greeks, the Romans, the Spanish, and the British, right? It says, in the 10 horns, which were 10 vassal states or nations that were who? Inferior unto that Roman Empire at that time, who gave forth, their or aided within the military might, who aided in the economy of the Roman Empire during that specific time, which we understand is NATO and the EU of today, man. Right? As Rome had those ancient vassal states, well, the US has those same vassal states today, man. So it says, "I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea." And we understand when the scriptures speak of the sea, matter of fact, it's also in this chapter, it speaks of the waters. I believe that's in Revelation 17 chapter, right? So Revelation 17, and so lucky. Let me get that precept. So the peoples, nations, and tongues. Yeah, 17 and 15. I don't know why I didn't see it. So lucky. So Revelation 17 and 15. Right here. It says, "And he saith unto me, the waters which thou sawest, where the whore sitteth," right? Babylon the Great. It says, "are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues," right? So that's speaking of the waters. That it was speaking of Revelation 13 chapter. Now, just for a little more edification, one second. Right? Because we understand the 7 heads: Greeks, Romans, Germania Major, Germania Minor, the French, Spanish, and British. And out of that British came that little horn, right? 10 horns. It's like that was the 7 heads. The 10 horns are the Vandals, the Ostrogoths, the Alamanis, the Anglo-Saxons, the Herulis, France, the Burgundians, the Lombardies. It's like the Lombards, the Visigoths, and the Suebes, right? Which were the EU, right? The modern day EU. And now of course, he's added more nations into the European Union and NATO. But these were the founding lands, so to speak, or the founding peoples that created the NATO and the EU, right? And the vassal state were lesser powers dominated by the stronger power, the Roman Empire at that time, which America, and we see Trump, as the scripture says, his look was more stout than his fellows. And when he came to that conference with, I believe, the European Union, he basically told them, "Hey, y'all gonna have to cough up more money, man. Hey, we're providing far more protection and assets than you are, and we're the only ones losing in this side of the deal," right? So ultimately, that sparked hatred between those countries, the beast and the whore, man, because they see and know that America is a superpower. The problem is that no one can compete with her militarily unless, they break from her, and all jump her, so to speak. And that's what the scripture is speaking about in Revelation, the 17th chapter. Ultimately, these nations hating this place, man, because of positions and moves that they're making like this, right? It says, "The control strengthens U.S. dominance over the GI-UK gap. Greenland, Iceland, UK, a critical NATO choke point for tracking Russian submarines and aircraft." It says the U.S. already operates Pacific Space base, vital for missile early warning systems, space surveillance, and ballistic missile defense. It says as Arctic ice melts, the region becomes a new front line rather than a frozen buffer. It says another reason is countering Russia and China. Greenland helps block expanding influence from rival powers. Russia is heavily militarizing the Arctic with new bases, icebreakers, and missile systems. Greenland provides early detection and interception capability against Russian ICBMs and bombers. China labeled itself a near Arctic state and has sought mining, ports, and infrastructure projects in Greenland. The U.S. interests helps prevent Chinese control of critical infrastructure in a NATO adjacent territory, right? And by the U.S. stumping, stumping and basically taking interest to the point where they say they're going to capture Greenland. Hey, it offends NATO, man, right? It offends these little countries in which Revelation the 17th chapter comes into play, right? Going back here, it says, and there came one of the seven angels which had the seven vials, and talked with me, saying unto them, come hither, I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore which sitteth upon many waters, the judgment of Babylon the great. It says, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, right? When we go into the book of Jeremiah, it speaks the wine of the wrath of her fornication, right? These nations, they sided with this whore, man, in its feat of reaching world domination, right? In his feat of passing forth the wines, the philosophies of Babylon the Great unto the rest of these nations, right? It says, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So I'm going to go down. I'm going to jump down to the 13th verse. It says, these have one mind and shall give their power and strength unto the beast, right? And they did that because they sided with America. All nations were in bed with this whore, right? So they ultimately gave one mind into what? Accomplishing that new world order, right? But ultimately, Yahweh Shema is going to switch things for these same nations that gave in unto Babylon the Great, and what they plan to do is the hammer of the earth. Yahweh Shema is ultimately going to allow these same nations that once were allies to become enemies, right? That's why the 14th verse says this: these shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them, right? Because we ultimately understand that these nations will have to fight against Yahweh Shai, right? And Esau is going to be the head of it. The scriptures speak about the war in heaven, right? And guess what? Yahweh Shai ain't losing, man, right? It says the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is the Lord of lords and kings of kings, and they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. One second. It says, verse 15, and he saith unto me, the waters which thou sawest, where the horse sitteth, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. And the 10 horns, right, going back into the EU, right, NATO and the EU, which we understand 10 horns is the EU, NATO is the 7 heads. It says, and the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, right? And this is just another step into them hating the whore, ultimately taking forth Greenland, right? A hub in which NATO, in the EU has basically held, man. And by the U.S. imposing forth their will or their power upon them, it's going to cause NATO and the EU, to have evil thoughts, so to speak. As the scripture speaks about that evil thought, matter of fact, let's grab that. Because evil thought in the book of Ezekiel, the 38th chapter, is ultimately these nations, coming to the point where they're going to press the button. You know, is Ezekiel 38 and 10. It says, "Thus saith the Lord power Yahweh, it shall also come to pass that at the same time shall things come into thy mind, and thou shalt think in evil thoughts," right? And it's going to come forth with action, man. It's not just going to be a thought, it's going to be an action, right? And what does that mean? Or what does that incur for America? Ultimately, all ye that bend the bow shoot at her, spare no arrows. Allies, former allies included, man, right? Hence, the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. America has been the bully upon the earth, hey, for a long time, man. Hey, Ezekiel 38 and 11, it says, "And thou shalt say, I will go up to the land of unwalled villages." Who's it speaking about? America. It says, "And I will go to them that are at rest, that dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls, and having neither bars nor gates," right? We understand in ancient war, when a nation um, that was ultimately empowered, they would have walls or trenches set about them, man, right? Some type of a garrison or protection, a wall set up so that you couldn't just easily come into their territory. You couldn't just come onto their land and take it over. Hey, but America's only bordered around with water, man. That's why it says the unwalled villages, right? Its protection is just the fact that it's further away from the rest of the nations because it's bordered by water. That's it. So going back here, it says natural resources and supply chain security. Greenland holds large untapped resources that matter in a post-oil world. It says rare earth elements critical for AI systems, right? And we understand AI data centers are being built up heavily in America, but it's going to be all across the world, right? This the whole small hat sentiment for building back better is a system based off of AI, man, and where artificial intelligence, the technocracy continues. It says military hardware, electric vehicles, renewable energy tech, uranium, which is beautiful that they stated uranium first, right? Because uranium isotopes 235 and I believe 237 are the main components in which nuclear missiles are the explosions, right? Or that combination of elements used to create the nuclear missiles. Uranium is one of the top minerals for it, man. Right? Uranium and plutonium, right? Those isotopes specifically are what caused the nuclear explosions. It says zinc, iron ore, and potentially oil and gas offshore. The U.S. currently relies heavily on China for rare earth metals. Greenland offers a way to diversify and de-risk supply chains, right? And we understand that the BRICS nations, they're a superpower ultimately, in which are diversifying and de-risking that supply chain due to all those nations coming together with their own resources, natural resources, and trading within themselves. Right? It says control of emerging Arctic trade routes. Arctic sea routes can cut weeks off shipping times between Asia, Europe, and North America. Whoever controls Arctic hub gains trade leverage, naval dominance, and economic advantage. Greenland would act as a logistics, refueling, and monitoring hub for these routes. Right? Since the U.S. interest in Greenland goes back over a century. In 1867, it discussed alongside the Alaska Purchase. In World War II, the U.S. occupied Greenland to block Nazi access. The Cold War, uh, Thule Air Base becomes a keystone of nuclear defense, and then Trump in 2019 publicly proposes purchasing Greenland, reviving the global debate. And in that debate, the rest of the world hates it, man. Right? Says the purpose of the U.S. gaining Greenland would to be to lock down Arctic dominance, secure future resources, uh, counter rival powers, maintain military supremacy in a rapidly changing world, right? And this is slipping from the grip of America. What this rapid access, man, right? Maintain that military presence. Says if you want, it's less about land and more about control, right? Who controls the next strategic frontier? And that's the point, right? When we go into this article here, it says U.S. officially warns that Greenland action could come within weeks or months. It would just shows you that prophecy does not fail, man. Right? It does not fail. Ultimately, what Yahweh Shemashah will occur is happening. says Trump has argued that without U.S. ownership, Russia and China could gain a foothold in the region, describing the island as a potential neighbor that America cannot afford to lose to adversaries. He has dismissed leasing arrangements, insisting that true defense requires outright ownership rather than temporary arrangements. Right? So when we go back into the book of Habakkuk, the second chapter, right? Oops. And it tells us here, 2 and 4, it says, Behold, his soul which is lifted up is not upright in him, but the just shall live by his faith. Verse 5, yea, also because he transgresseth by wine, he is a proud man, neither keepeth at home. Who enlargeth his desire is hell, and is his death, and cannot be satisfied. This is America, man, right? Ultimately, the Edomite, right? A proud man who can't keep at home. He needs it all, man. He's not sufficed unless he owns everything, unless it's all in his power. He said, what the hell am I going to do with a lease arrangement on Greenland when I could just strong arm and own it? Same thing that he said to Venezuela. Well, why would I do a deal with you if I could just take you over? Right? And this is how that hammer runs throughout the earth, man. Right? If he knows that he can conquer you, or if you're willing to do a trade with him, he's just going to take you over. Because how are you going to fight against him? Right? And that's why the scripture says, who shall make war with the beast, man? But the scripture lets us know who's going to make war with that beast. And in the U.S. pulling this move against Greenland, it's only going to heighten prophecy, man. Because these nations, NATO and the EU, are going to, as the scripture says, Revelation 17 and 16, and the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. So we're in the midst of seeing this unfold, man. Right? The hate is increasing, and call on Yahweh Shema Shai. Hey, because the Lord gave us the scripture says in the book of Amos, right? He showed the secrets unto his servants, the prophets, man. So we see that this move here is going to catapult, or is a catalyst in ultimately America being destroyed, man, by thermonuclear missiles from its allies, right? Or former allies, I should say, right? Verse 6 in Habakkuk, it says, shall not all these take up a parable against him, and a taunting proverb against him, and say, woe, which means destruction. Woe to him that increaseth that which is not his. How long? And to him that ladeth himself with thick clay, right, which is heavy debt. It says, shall they not rise up suddenly that shall bite thee, and awake that shall vex thee, and thou shalt be for booties unto them? Right? Verse 12, it says, woe to him that buildeth a town with blood, and establish a city by iniquity. And this is what Edom has been doing, from all the land that we see today, man. He's captured by doing what? By destroying, by bringing forth blood upon nations and people. All right, this is Jeremiah 50th chapter. And I'm read the 14th verse, and it reads, put yourselves in array against Babylon round about. All ye that bend the bow, shoot at her, spare no arrows, for she hath sinned against Yahweh Bashim Yahushai. Shout against her round about, she hath given her hand. Her foundations are fallen, her walls are thrown down. For it is the vengeance of Yahweh. Take vengeance upon her, as she had done, do unto her. Cut off the sower from Babylon, and him that handleth the sickle in the time of harvest, for fear of the oppressing sword. They shall turn everyone to his people, and they shall flee into his own land. But the point was 14:15, man. Right? Take vengeance upon her, as she had done, do unto her. Hey, so we're about to see, more hails appear upon the earth. Right? These nations are going to speak out more about the wrong that Babylon is doing, to the point where they're just going to get sick of this place completely, and are going to aid in its destruction. Thus saith the Bible. So that was the point, just to get a skinny on what's going on according to the U.S. and this Greenland conflict. Showing you that it directly links up to Revelation the 17th chapter, and ultimately the destruction of Babylon the Great, as it's spoken of in Revelation the 18th chapter. Okay, so Lord willing, this lesson was edifying unto the body. I want to give all praises, glory, and honor unto Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Bahashim, Harakah HaKodash, and double honors unto the apostles and elders of GMS Great Millstone, and a sincere shalom to you. I can bring out this word in diligence and in truth. Shalom.